partisan left. Okay, so what can we do with this information? Yes.
Do you look at digital content for CNN and Fox as well?
No. Well, so on Fox, they actually have FoxNews.com ranked separately. This is, eventually we'll like break it all out. Like MSNBC.com is mostly just MSNBC clips of TV shows. So whereas like FoxNews.com is more like traditional articles, like a news site.
Yeah, I'm a writer for CNN, that's why I'm asking.
Okay, yeah, and so CNN, like online content is more news, right? Like it's less analysis. Like the TV shows are analysis, but people go to CNN.com to find the news because they can find the actual news stories. CNN International is like well renowned around the world, has reputation for putting lots of journalists in spots covering important stories and not being so biased. Like CNN International would have a much different ranking here. But yeah, so the online content is much different. I didn't do it here for CNN. Oh, I did. CNN.com. Right there. Yeah. So I did MSNBC.com. Yeah, MSNBC.com because there's like mostly TV shows too. Yeah. All right. So what can we do with this information? You can get the sense that I'm gathering a lot of data, and part of it is to present this consumer resource that people can trust. And I always want that to be free and available for people. Like they can go to it like Snopes or more like what I envision like the consumer reports of reading the news. But with all that data, there's so much more you can do. With the data, you can track this over time. You can see how coverage changes. You can see how news sources changes. There's one on there, there's Independent Journal Review, IJR. So that was formerly a very right-leaning publication. And they made this very concerted effort to have this IJR blue and IJR red, and then syndicate a lot of stuff from AP. And so now you look at their story selection, and it's quite neutral. So that changed a lot just in the last 9 to 12 months or so. That's important to watch and know. But we can do social science research, like what I mentioned before about part of the problem why it's hard to research the effect the media has on people is because there's no baseline of what the media is. So this is that part. So you can anchor this part, then you can run studies against that. The other thing is brand and corporate responsibility. So there is a lot of information available to brands and advertisers about the audience, about the people who are looking, the demographics of who's watching the content. There's very little about what the content is itself. You can have people, brands will say, okay, don't run my ads on any sites that have any hate or porn, but anything else, run it on there. And then they end up running their ads on stuff that's really damaging to their brands. I think people would like to be able to avoid some boycotts because if they know that one of the shows on one of the channels has a 20% likelihood of saying something pretty racist in the next 2 weeks, maybe run your ad on another show on that same network. You can get really granular, or you can you may want to target a demographic that is you may want to target a certain demographic, but if you know that you can target that demographic by supporting something responsible and something that's informative and more true, then instead of supporting something that's worse quality and destroying our society, then maybe there are brands out there that care about that. There are brands that don't, obviously, but it's a way for companies to be able to tell who should I really be putting my money behind, and ideally we want to push that towards the good stuff, push that towards the good journalism. This is one of the ways to actually increase better the business model of journalism, which is a real struggle right now.
So is your plan then to eventually sell this type of data to companies?
Yeah. Yes. And so I think journalism organizations, research organizations, brands, and those are the main ones, would be interested in this kind of data. And for journalists, here's one thing I wanted to point out. Okay, so what erodes trust in journalism? I think we know that people click on opinion content and analysis content and stuff that's like biased and feels good, okay? But this is kind of like saying, well, that's what people want, you know? The people want cheese. They want mozzarella cheese sticks. They want blooming onions. They want like a double quarter pounder of cheese. They want a sandwich that has like a chicken instead of buns, right? Yes, people do want things that are bad for them. We understand that, but it doesn't make it right. And if people want to do the right thing and also make money, there's a way to do that. People will tune in to news that is good for them and makes a difference for them. But so I think even traditionally reputable sources like the Washington Post, for example, they run a lot of analysis content on the front page right now. It's a lot. And a lot of opinion is like really high up there too, because it gets a lot of clicks and views and traffic. I don't think that's necessarily that helpful for our political discourse. Local news is still really highly trusted. Evening news is still really highly trusted in this journalism environment. And if you want to see the effect that continuing to do analysis has on the trust of journalists, look at this one thing. Okay, Dan Rather and Brian Williams, okay, both former anchors for evening news. Very, very highly trusted and respected when in those roles, okay? Since then, you know, many journalists say, I just have a responsibility to say the truth, say what's out there. So like your CNN anchors will say, it's my responsibility to say that it's wrong, that Trump did this thing. But then that immediately casts them as a partisan in the eyes of some. It immediately erodes their trust. So that might be true for them, it might be true universally, but it erodes their trust, and maybe that's not the best role for them. Maybe their role is to be the fourth estate, where it's just, we're telling you how it is, and we can persuade you just on that. Like, so Dan Rather has a channel called News and Guts right now, and it runs on the Young Turks channel, which is a very progressive channel. So people who maybe used to respect Dan Rather's opinion, since most of what he puts out there is analysis and opinion right now, will discard what he says completely. People who maybe used to trust Brian Williams in his role as an evening anchor, because he hosts the 11th Hour with Brian Williams, will write him off as a partisan hack. So folks that can stay in that spot are the ones that can retain trust. So, yep, go ahead.
A couple of questions. In your analysis, when you look at like the columns of people like George Will or David Brooks, who were always thought of as always conservative columnists, but now they tend to not like the administration. For example, do they end up sort of being ranked in the skews left category?
Excellent question. Okay, love that question. Okay, so the Never Trumpers, covering bias in the era of Trump is a huge, a big confounding factor. I wrestled with this for quite a while. But let's go back to those 19 political issues: immigration, guns, taxes, etc. So, and imagine this, hyper-partisan left to a hyper-partisan right. And let's say like George Will or Rick Wilson, for example, or Bill Kristol they'd be hyper-partisan right on most of those issues, right? They would be hyper-partisan right for immigration, for reproductive rights, for LGBT civil rights issues, for taxes, for Second Amendment issues. Be hyper-partisan right on all of those things, okay? And then add another issue as a separate issue, and it's things Trump says and does, okay? Just things as its own issue, okay? And he might say something that's like, that they object to for actually very conservative reasons. So he may say something that is offensive to people on the left for a certain reason, just because it's attacking a minority community, for example. But the conservative person may dislike that because it attacks the rule of law, or it's not in keeping with the decorum of the office of the president. Very traditional conservative notions and morals, right? So just because, George Will and Charlie Sykes and, all those folks are, don't like, or would be like more neutral in that position. I would call that position of not liking a thing that Donald Trump says and does. A lot of times it's a neutral thing. It's not it's not like, he said a terrible thing, and because you think it's terrible, you're left. No, like it can be objectively terrible to people on the right and the left, and therefore be a neutral position. So that confuses a lot of people right now. Like Jennifer Rubin, who writes for the New York Times, or Steve Schmidt on MSNBC, or Nicole Wallace on MSNBC, like all Republicans. And because of because they have not liked things Trump says and does in the beginning, people say, oh, you're liberal. No, what you have to anchor by are the issues. And in this case, if you treat Trump as its own issue, it's much easier to see that clarity. And then you can be like, okay, the stat that gets me is when they say, 90% of coverage of Trump has been negative. It's like, okay, well, 90% of coverage of like Harvey Weinstein is negative too. Right? Like sometimes the thing is like we have a shared revulsion of the thing itself, and it's not the bias, it's the morality, and those are intertwined, the bias and the morality. So, I think that's a good question. Yes.
I have a question about photography, because I'm a news photographer, and when I scroll through Facebook, I've been noticing that the thumbnail images that go along with a particular article, I know you talked about graphics, but would the thumbnail image be incorporated in your methodology?
Yes, the graphic that shows up is really indicative. So I have a blog post of this example on my website. So remember when Bill O'Reilly settled for $32 million for a sexual harassment lawsuit? Okay, so there was a site called like Pink something. I don't know what it was, but it said the title was Bill O'Reilly caught up in $32 million gay porn scandal. And then the thumbnail was like, two men, it was like the cover like of like a gay porn movie. Like that was the image, and you're like, what did Bill O'Reilly do, right? And so it was if you even went to the website, that wasn't even a lead thumbnail on the site. It wasn't lead graphic on the site. It was just the lead thumbnail on Twitter or Facebook. And it got people to click, and it was something about how like he may have had some investments in something to do with the company that got shut down because they were selling pornography. It was like so tangential to the story that it was like it was a trash article, right? But the picture contributed to the trashiness of it.
I guess, but I would say that's a difference between a graphic and an actual photograph from a photojournalist, because I think a graphic is just, that's something that somebody made up.
Right, it could be stock photos or whatever.
Could be stock photos or whatever, but I just think that maybe the photography, it could be a separate element and it might be even more hard to gauge because I don't know you can read a photograph so many different ways. Like especially when the Dr. Ford testimony, I looked at the thumbnail images from like the New York Post, the New York Times, the Washington, and Fox News, and you could see by the angle which photograph they took, like you can kind of pick out a bias, I think.
Absolutely.
Are you talking about like depending on how their mouth might look?
Like so, like
when
their push alerts came out that day, I hit on it, and then like the first thing that pops up, and like like you're saying, which direction they're looking, like is their mouth open, or like how does it portray them? So, anyways, I just want to point that out.
That's a really important measure. So when we say graphic, it means a photos as well, and usually it is the photo. I mean, in political coverage, it's almost always the photo of like Trump or Hillary. Like, how many unflattering pictures of those two have you seen? Right? Yeah, guys, like the world's most hideous human beings because their pictures on them. All right. So I'll stick around for more questions, but really want to thank you for your time and your interest.